Hello, and welcome to my excruciatingly detailed Gordon Freeman cosplay tutorial. In this part, we will be going over making the bicep armor. I started off with using Bro Navarro's Gordon Freeman pattern. However, when I tried it on my husband, it quickly became apparent that I was going to have to modify the pattern in order to fit my husband's body properly. As a result, I ended up drafting up an entirely different pattern of my own using the duct tape and saran wrap method. The pattern ended up getting significantly lengthened due to my husband's height. I also had to go back in and widen the bicep area because I didn't account for him flexing, and I had to open it up a bit. You know, lessons learned. I then grabbed some leftover 5mm EVA foam, tacked down my pattern with some pins, traced it out with a silver Sharpie, making sure to include all of my registration marks before finally cutting it out. When I rotated Gordon, I noticed he had these weird pyramid things on the back of his arms, so I decided to make them out of the half-inch thick EVA foam mats from Harbor Freight. They're super versatile since they're textured on one side and then super smooth on the other. Once I figured out the shape of the pyramid, I pinned it down to the floor mat and then traced it out, making sure to note where I wanted the bevels. When it comes to making bevels, I highly recommend this video by the Cosplay Apprentice. Essentially, I'm making note of the distance between the 2 points of the bevel. From the outermost point, I extend it down the width of the foam, where I then connect the bottom point to the inner point I made previously with a diagonal line. From here, I have the exact angle I can line up my blade in order to cut through the foam. I always recommend using a straight edge for your cuts to get those really crisp, clean lines. Because this bevel flares out, I also had to make sure to cut off some of the excess foam on the side. And here's my beauties. They're not perfect, but it took freaking forever to get here, and I'm not redoing them again. It was then time for our first round of sanding, because that's all cosplay is. I used my 120 grit drill bit to get rid of some of the larger chunks and the grinding bit to smooth it out. To cover up the texture on the back of the pyramid pieces, I cut out pieces of 2mm EVA foam and then glued them on with contact cement. I highly recommend using these silicone face mask brushes when you're applying your glue, as they make cleanup a breeze. With the foam glued on, I then cleaned up some of the edges with foam clay. And here's where some fun problem solving came into play. I wanted the pieces to be flush against the foam, but I had this pesky little bump at the top. Because of this, I decided to cut out a little window for the pyramid. I then lined up the edges as best as I could in order to make it look flush. However, this caused some of the foam to jet out into the interior part of the piece. Figuring no one was going to look on the interior, I hacked away at it with a X-Acto knife, and this is the result. But thanks to the power of EVA foam, I just cut out another little piece out of 2mm foam and slapped it on the interior. No harm done. I then tried tackling the little divots on the front. Gordon has these all over his armor, so this was definitely good practice. I very carefully cut along the 2 sides of the line that I had drawn and then started to pick at the interior. I know there's probably a much cleaner way to do this, since when I pulled it out there's still some little bits and stuff underneath, but I'm just gonna pretend that those are gunk and dirt that got caught in the divot. With my pieces all ready to go, it was then time for me to glue them together with contact cement. And this is where we ran into yet another issue. Since making the original pattern, my husband's biceps grew because he's been getting those gains. And as a result, I had to widen the bicep area by about an inch. It's still a bit messy, but I think I did okay, all things considered. And what's up next? You guessed it, even more sanding. I used my dremel to clean up all my edges to make them nice and smooth before moving on to hand sanding all my seams with some 120 grit sandpaper, following it up with some 220 grit sandpaper to smooth it out. It was then time to heat seal and heat form the armor. As you can see, it closed up the pores really nicely, and now the armor is much more cylindrical. It also opened up the little divots I made. Now on to the final part. With just a little bit of water, I dampened each of my seams and gaps before taking thin layers of foam clay and spreading them out into the gaps. Once dry, I took some 220 grit sandpaper and hand sanded each of the seams. Because of how nicely the foam clay melds into the EVA foam, as I sand, the seams virtually disappear. And that's it. Here's the final result. Again, it looks really messy because of all the sanding that was done, but believe me, it will look better once I've primed and painted it. Hope you enjoyed this first part of the tutorial. I'm going to try to go through every piece of Gordon and then do all the painting as one thing, but I appreciate you coming along with me for the ride. It's so far pretty difficult since it took me forever just to make these 2 pieces, but I look forward to the challenge that's to come. Alright, thank you so much.